Hey up my YouTube friends, I hope you're doing okay. My name's Dave K and you are watching the Yorkshire Bike Mechanics YouTube channel from sunny Sowerby Bridge. Do you know, it is absolutely boiling today. And I'd normally wear an apron, but it's too warm, so it's just a t-shirt today. And I hope it's warm where you are as well, but it's a bit too warm today. And I'm having a bit of tidy up. I'm having a bit of a tidy up. That's what I'm gonna do. Now, Ryan, my son who normally works with me, is in Morzine at minute, riding his bike. And he sent me some photos yesterday. And the weather is absolutely gorgeous in Morzine at minute. And if you've ever been to Morzine riding your mountain bike, it's absolutely the best place ever. So, Ryan's out there riding his bike, and my son lived there. I have another son as well, which he lives out there as well in Geneva. So they're having a great time. So what we're going to do today, right, we're going to go back to basics, okay? Now you guys have said it's all right for you fancy pants working on all these e-bikes and lovely £1,000 worth of stuff, but what about us with just normal bikes? Well, this is your video. It's just a standard service on a hardtail. It's a cube and it's a woman's bike, okay? And it's generally not in bad condition by the look of it, okay? So let's crack on. So here she is. It's a Cube SL Road Hybrid, okay, and by looking at it, it looks all right. It looks in good condition, it's clean, it's tidy, it looks as though it's been well looked after, but we haven't looked at it yet. But you guys and gals should know that this little baby here, our chain checking tool, is the Bible for cycle mechanics, and this is the first thing that you should pick up before you actually go ahead and dive into a bike to see what's going on. So we've put it in the stand. Let's lift it up a little bit, okay? I'll bring the camera in a little bit closer because we've had a quick look round this bike, and as you can see, it doesn't look too bad. It's nice and clean. It's not covered or blathered in mud. So this customer has said to me that this bike is actually running quite nice at the moment, apart from the back brake that he says is squealing like a raving banshee. So we need to take a look at that and see what's actually going on with that. Now this is a compact chain set, which means that it's 50 teeth on the top and 34 on the bottom. It's 8-speed and it looks like this 34 on the top at the back, okay? It's a fairly standard setup. It's a Claris, a Shimano Claris. So let's take this chain checking tool and we'll see where we are. So let's drop it in there, okay, and we'll stretch. Now, this chain checking tool is telling me that this chain is stretched past its limit and the rest, okay? So let's take a closer look. So it's actually on 1mm at the moment, is this chain checking tool. Let me see if I can focus in. Don't know whether you can see that. But if we move it backwards and forwards, it's 1mm and again. So I reckon that's 2mm stretched. Okay, so that tells us that it tells us that the chain's gone completely. It's gone. And it's quite close to snapping at that particular stretch. So should we go and change this chain and do nothing else? No, we shouldn't, because if we do, and if we change this chain, then it's going to skip and jump because the chain is stretched that much. It's actually a different shape than the back cassette and the front rings. So if we put a new chain on here, it will skip and pull over the back, and it could actually get stuck up at the front. Let's look at the front rings and see how much wear is on the front rings. Now, if we compare it, let's see if we can dive in there. Can you see that? There you can, look, there at top. So you can see at the top there, you can see the shape of the rings, and you can see where the chain slots in and how uniform that is, okay? Now it's fairly uniform compared to a lot I see. Now sometimes you get these little slots, they're proper elongated, and one side it shoots off to the back, which also indicates loads and loads of wear. Now it could be that we might be able to get away with keeping that that small chainring. The top one don't look too bad, which obviously tells me that this particular rider spends most of the time in the small one at the front. So the question then is, how much do we replace? Okay, we can't just put a new chain on there. There's no point in doing it. So we know from the amount of stretch, we're going to have to replace that cassette. We've got to replace that cassette, and we've got to replace the chain. Do we have to replace the rings at the front? I would say that I would like to replace the small ring, to be honest, because I don't know the history of this bike. It's the first time that I've had this bike in, and I don't know the history. And for the price of a small 34 ring on this bike, I would probably want to replace all three. So I'd replace the chain, the small ring, the cassette at the back. Okay, then we know we've got a complete new set. The top ring looks fine because I think she, obviously, like I said, she spends most of the time on the small ring. So that's that kind of looked at. Okay, let's look at something else. Let's look at the cable, the gear cable. We'll have a close look. We can see that this gear cable is quite discoloured. You can see that it's quite black. So I think as part of this, we should replace the this inner cable at least. So his next job is to check the alignment of the rear derailleur and the hanger as well. Now we know that this particular hanger here, if it isn't directly vertical, if it's bent in any way, then the gear change is actually going to be way out. And also what we need to find out is the condition of the derailleur as well. So the derailleur doesn't actually look too bad at the minute. There's plenty of spring in there. It's not, we've got a little bit of movement there, which is not too bad, to be honest. I've seen a lot worse. It's fairly free. Obviously it's dry, it needs lubricating and cleaning, but generally speaking it's not too bad for a hybrid. So let's see what gear changes are like. Okay, it's a little bit slower going down. That could be the wear on the cassette, could be the cable, but we know that's not running right. But it's very difficult to get something running nice like this, particularly when you've got so much wear on all this. Like, you will really struggle. But the main thing that we need to find out is that this hanger's straight and the derailleur's not in bad condition. If we can get them two right, and once we replace this, then everything else will fall into place. Let's have a look at the head tube. So to find out what the head tube's like on the bearings, what the bearings are like in the headset rather, is we kind of swing it backwards and forwards off the floor. Okay, and that's actually quite loose. It's not grinding, it don't feel gritty. It's actually really smooth. It's not stopping and then kind of jumping along. Let's drop it down to the floor. And we need to put us a hand around the headset at the top here and the actual down tube, and we need to put the front brake on and rock it backwards and forwards to see if there's any movement on there. And we need to do the same at the bottom where the forks go into the head tube. We need to rock that backwards and forwards, and I'm glad to say there's no movement there at all. That's actually quite solid and it feels quite smooth. So while we've got it on the ground, let's look at what's going on with this back brake. Okay, so it's said that this back brake is actually squealing. Let's see how bad it is. Oh yeah. Squealing brakes. Okay, so why does that squeal like it does? Okay, there's a few reasons why it does, and I'll come to that in a second. Let's get the camera back up. Okay, so these are hydraulic brakes, as you probably know. Why do they squeal so much? Well, the main reason why they squeal, this is the most common reason why they squeal, is they've got contamination on them, okay? They've got a little bit of overspray of oil or something like that. Now, you can pick it up without knowing. You can pick it up off the road, a little bit of diesel gets thrown up and unfortunately lands on your disc. That will make your disc squeal like that. Now, that squeal is an oil squeal. I can tell from that squeal that this is contamination. So it could be, the second reason, it could be that there's a leak on this caliper, and when he puts his brake on, a tiny little bit of fluid leaks out of one of the pistons inside and gradually works its way onto the pad. That will cause the squealing. Now, if that's the case, on this particular caliper, it's a replacement caliper. These are not serviceable and we need to replace it. So that's two reasons why these can squeal. The third reason is it can be completely run out of pad, okay, and you're down to metal. It doesn't sound like it's on the metal because that's a very distinctive grinding sound if you're on the metal and there's no particular fibre left on the pad even. So I don't think it's that. I think this is oil contamination, and it's either come from a weeping piston in there, or it's come from an overspray or oil from some other place, accidentally or not. So how can we find out which one it is? Well, the easiest way of finding out which one it is to take these brake pads out and inspect them and look at them and see if we can find any wetness on the back. So let's do that now. Now, I've pulled a little circlip out of the top which will free these brake pads off, but these particular brake pads come out from the bottom, so we need to remove this back wheel. So let's drop the gears down to the bottom, which will make it easier to get the derailleur loose. That's it. Take the quick release out very gently. Drop the wheel out of the frame, put that to one side. Okay, so let's have a look at these pads and we'll pull them out front bottom. You're not going to damage much when you're doing this, okay? So what we're looking for is we're looking for wetness on the back of the pad, an indication of oil, okay? And with a smell as well. You can sometimes smell oil. Let's see if I can focus that in. Sometimes you can smell oil on the back. They don't look blathered in oil, to be honest, but there could still be a leak on the piston and it could have actually dissipated into the pad. But they don't look obviously wet. The other indication is if you run your finger under the caliper at the bottom, you can usually feel wetness, oil from the caliper at the bottom. It's dirty, but it don't feel particularly oily. Okay, so it's kind of inconclusive in a way. Another thing we can do is obviously run his hand round the disc on the back wheel to see if that's wet. So what we need to do is we need to put these pads back in, and I'll show you a little way we can actually find out if there's actually oil weeping from this caliper or not. Now, it means an overnight test, but I'll show you what we do. First thing that we need to do is we need to clean this caliper. I'll clean it and then I'll come back. So I've cleaned these pads with isopropyl alcohol, or you can use disc cleaner if you wish. And what we've cleaned them for basically is so we can detect oil tomorrow once we've actually had it on test to see where it's leaking from, if it is leaking. And I'm just going to bob that circlip in there just loose, just to stop them dropping out. Just leave it fairly loose there, that's it. And then pop this wheel back in, bob it in rather, not pop it in. I'm going to bob this wheel back in and just put it in very loosely. Okay. Okay, and now what we need to do is we need to get a tie wrap and we need to pump the rear brake up, and we need to put a tie wrap on to make sure that the lever's tight. I'll just get this phone. And we've put us pads back in as caliper. We'll just pump it up, put us tie wrap on, and we squeeze it and tighten it up, not too tight. Okay, so what we need to do with that is leave it overnight, okay? And tomorrow morning when we come back to it, it should have the same sort of tension as what you've got there. It should be the same kind of feel as what you can feel right now. And when you go back to the back end, you need to run your fingers underneath the caliper just to see if there's any oil that's actually dripped out anywhere. Under the side, round there, the back, where the cable, where the hose goes in. You're checking anywhere for any kind of wetness or oil that's coming out of there. Now, if the lever is still as hard as what it is at the moment, come tomorrow morning, and there's no evidence of any wetness around your caliper, then the obvious thing, or the main thing, is that the reason why it's squealing is because it's got contamination on it from somewhere else. So at that point, you put a brand new pair of pads in, you give it a good clean again with isopropyl alcohol or brake cleaner, and then you start again, and it shouldn't squeal. Now, in my view and from my experience, it tells me that you're always best to buy original brake pads from the manufacturer, unless you have a brand that you use a lot that you know and you can trust. I mean, we use Aztec quite a lot, Aztec pads, and they're really, really good, and I've no problem with using Aztecs on a Shimano caliper because I know they work. But if you can't get anything like that, and you've got a squealing brake, it's always best to go back to the original supplier's pads, original manufacturer's pads, because the chances are they don't squeak coming out of the factory. So if we just go around and just physically feel these spokes, just to make sure there's no slack ones, they seem all right. Okay, and we'll just quickly spin the wheel just to make sure it's reasonably true. And that one's not too bad, that's all right. Okay. The disc is fairly true as well, the rotor's fairly true, because we can look at that at the same time. Okay, so what we need to do basically, so that's that. So if you remember earlier, we looked at this front derailleur, and we looked at, it's generally not in bad condition, but obviously these screw tops are slightly rusty, but I think it'll come back. I think we just need to obviously get it lubricated and get it cleaned up, and make sure these screw heads turn so we can adjust it. And if we go around to the bar, just to make sure that actually it's working and it's not seized. It is working. It's quite stiff, but it is working. But I think a clean up and a lube will sort that out. Let's have a look at the bottom bracket. So we can grab hold of the right pedal and the left pedal, okay, and we can move it backwards and forwards to see if there's any movement in there. And there's nothing at all there. It feels quite smooth. It's not noisy. That's the chain that's running through the derailleur. But it's not noisy in any way. It's nice and tight. So that's fine. Plenty of life in the tyres. Plenty of air in them. We've had a quick look at inspecting the frame for any cracks or anything like that. Anything unusual, any crash damage or anything like that. So we'll quickly go over that. The bearings in the front, just check the wheel side to side. There's no movement there. There's no movement in the back one either. The pads will check in the front. They're fairly easy to replace. I'm sure you know how to change pads. So that's basically a very, very basic service that anybody can do on a bike. So you've got a list of bits that you actually need to put on your bike, but let's focus on one particular item, and that's the front chainring, okay? Because we need the front chainring that's specific for this particular chain set. Now, there's hundreds and hundreds of chainrings out there on the internet, and you could put in 34 tooth chainring Shimano and it will bring you hundreds up. So how can I find the original chainring that went on this bike, and is it still available? Well, I'll show you how. The bit that you need is the number off the crank arm, off the end of the crank arm on the inside, and I'll put a picture of it now. So that is the number that you need. The next thing that you need to do is you need to jump on the internet and you need to go to Shimano Tech Docs. Okay, type that into Google, Shimano Tech Docs, and when you get there, this is what you'll see. And this is the space that we need to put as crank number, that the photograph that I showed you, or whatever's on your particular crankset of the part that you're trying to find. So this particular crankset is FC-R2000. And if we go and click on that, click a search, and this one, the bottom one, the EV one, is that you need the one that you need to click on, because this is the diagrams of the parts list for that particular crankset. Okay, so we know that your chainring is 34B, which is there, and the part number is there. So if we select that, copy it, and if we go back to Google, copy and paste it in there, press enter, and it'll bring us up the exact chainring that you want for your particular bike. Shimano Tech Docs is a brilliant tool to be able to find parts for your bike. If it's Shimano, all you need to do is you need the part number, drop it into that box, find the EV PDF, and it'll give you the part number for that particular part that you need for your bike. The same applies to SRAM. If you've got SRAM stuff, you can look at SRAM Tech Catalogue and you can copy the part number from them as well, and then drop that into the internet. It's a great way to find what you need for your bike. I hope you enjoyed that. It's an easy way to carry out a simple service on your bike. Easy to find parts on the internet. If you need me to show you how to put cassettes on and chains, just leave a comment. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for watching. Toodle pip.